Schoolboy growing up in Edinburgh, I delivered milk here, Fettes College. This imposing French chateau is the school where the author Ian Fleming had a certain James Bond expelled from. A particular old school tie, it was never my problem. I left school at 13. I've filmed in most of the world's great cities, which makes coming home here all the better. To me, Edinburgh seems to have been built as a film set. Take this particular backdrop from ancient Greece. Edinburgh's own Parthenon, the Athens of the North. But in Edinburgh, the classic and the romantic are never far apart. Like this classical temple in memory of that most romantic poet of the Doric, Robert Burns. It's a city where these two historical forces seem to fuse into one. Edinburgh's history is Scotland's history. At Holyrood, once the home of Scottish kings and Mary, Queen of Scots, it's part of Europe's history too. Under this heraldic ceiling within the old Palace of Holyrood House pivoted Queen Mary's tempestuous life. Here, Darnley, her brutal husband, dragged the court musician David Rizzio to his death before he too was murdered. And in her turn, the Queen of Scots was doomed. Mary would only have recognized this side of her palace. A century and a half later, the same Gothic style was used to create classic symmetry. The early church, spreading from island sanctuaries like Inchcolm Abbey, tempered the spirits of the first inhabitants, though for long Edinburgh remained a very wild place. To settle an argument by sword in medieval Europe was to settle à la mode d'Edinburgh. Sport has always been big here, and like war, sometimes got out of hand. On this very spot 200 years ago, two old Edinburgh worthies met to settle a wager. Who'd be the first to drive a ball straight over the crown steeple of St. Giles? Golf and other such sports were frowned on even 100 years before John Knox's Reformation. We're right under the city chambers. These houses have survived more than 200 years. In 1645, all 200 inhabitants of these buildings died of the plague. No one has lived here since. To expand in the old walled city of Edinburgh, the buildings just had to grow upwards, like a medieval Manhattan. Some skyscraper tenements went up 14 stories, and built of stone and rubble, many fell down under their own weight. One such fall is commemorated here. "Heave a war, chaps," cried the entombed voice under the collapsed rubble. "I'm no dead yet." Confined to breaking point, the city had to escape its walls. On green fields across the valley, a new town was devised, and in contrast to Edinburgh's past, the buildings rose in the classical style. The first inhabitants over here were of the pioneer sort. Amongst them were two Irish giants, a warm-hearted, hard-drinking Polish dwarf called Count Borislaski, known locally as Count Barrel of Whiskey. The growth of the new town brought Edinburgh into its golden age. The arts and sciences flourished hand in hand, and Edinburgh won an international reputation for technical inventions. It's still a city that aspires to scientific innovation. Out of herbal medicine and medical research grew the beauty of Edinburgh's Royal Botanic Garden.
Another botanically related medical breakthrough was Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin. And over here, one November evening in 1847, a young Edinburgh professor caused his guests to fall unconscious under the dining room table there, because this was the home of James Simpson, the pioneer of chloroform and the deep sleep of anesthesia.
Medicine sometimes advanced here on the practice of direst crime. Preying by night in alleys like these lurked the notorious body-snatchers, Burke and Hare. Here they trapped their victims and smothered them for the anatomists of Edinburgh University, an end which soon befell Burke himself. The detective work of Sherlock Holmes was inspired by an Edinburgh doctor's skills in diagnosis. In fact, Conan Doyle studied medicine here. The strange case of Burke and Hare fascinated both the writer and the lawyer in the mind of Sir Walter Scott. As clerk to the Scottish courts, Scott too would have paraded in this great hall where once the Scottish Parliament met. Scotland's legal system, unlike England's, is based on Roman law, a classic mantle which extends to Scots contemporaries who remain like Roman senators frozen in white marble. Once again in Edinburgh, the romantic and the classic rest happily side by side, as Scott himself does in Roman robes under the spire of his Gothic rocket. And it took quite a romantic turn of mind to call Edinburgh's main railway station Waverley, after a shelf full of Scott's novels. My Edinburgh home was neither in the old town or the new, but somewhere in between, here in Fountain Bridge. I remember when I was a boy, in the summer, late on a Saturday afternoon, the men used to change their caps for the traditional Edinburgh hangout. I wonder if that's where the Americans got their term. Where do you hang out? The brewery used to be only at the back. Now we're completely surrounded by it. The brewery workers used to pour out of the gate straight into that pub, where they paid for the beer that they'd already been paid for brewing. It was here that Scott's old friend, the Ettrick shepherd, evolved his recipe for immortality. If only the exact daily intake of whisky could be established and stuck to, doctors and graveyards would cease to exist. The Edinburgh Festival's a collision of talents. For each, the chance of fame, for a day at least. After centuries of security, the castle defences have finally surrendered to the international army of tourists.
A couple of 100 years ago, the only foreigners within the castle walls were prisoners. And during the American Wars of Independence, the captured colonial sympathizers left their marks.
It was over this soaring parapet that the French Viscount Saint-Yves escaped, down over the castle rocks. A highly improbable fiction, but wonderfully told by another Edinburgh-born writer, Robert Louis Stevenson.
Perhaps those prisoners then had more freedom than our overseas visitors now.
The 1 o'clock gun startles the birds, but not the shoppers in Princes Street. Edinburgh is a city that provides everything. I've just been reminded that there are over 24 golf courses within easy striking distance from here, which includes the world-famous Muirfield, where our Open Championship is often played. Edinburgh is a living, working city of contrasts. Almost at every street corner, the ancient past rubs shoulders with the up-to-the-minute present. It's still a city of industrial innovation, and for a place to live, it's generously endowed.